Hey, isn't today our honeymoon, when we're supposed to go on a trip together? Why did you rip up my passport just as we were getting ready to go? I couldn't believe what my husband had done. He ripped my passport without asking, looking really pleased with himself. It made me so mad. I never wanted to go on this trip with you. I was always going to go with my mom instead. Before we got married, I felt some tension, but I didn't realize how messed up things were between my husband and his mom. Nobody in my friend group ever talked about their mother-in-law taking over their honeymoon. I was shocked and mad about this crazy situation, but mostly I felt super weirded out. I started to question if marrying him was a big mistake. As he pulled out scissors and started cutting up my passport, I saw my mother-in-law grinning like crazy and knew I had to escape from there fast. It was totally unexpected, but I had just the right proof to take them both down. My name's Sarah. I'm 29 and been working for 7 years. Recently, my boyfriend of 4 years popped the question I've been waiting for. Now, I'm knee-deep in planning our wedding and honeymoon. I met my husband after I started working. I've always been more on the quiet side, and although I had a boyfriend in college, things just didn't work out. After that, I didn't really date anyone seriously for a while. So when I started working, it was a big surprise to find myself getting married before many of my colleagues. I think I was even more shocked than anyone else. My husband was a senior at the company when I first joined, and he was always there to help me when I struggled with new tasks. Even though the only guy I dated before him was a classmate, there was something different about someone who was 5 years older. I found him reliable and trustworthy. When he asked me out on our first date, I was ecstatic. I still hold dear the dolphin figurine we bought at the aquarium during that date. When he mentioned wanting to date with marriage in mind, I felt like I was on cloud 9. We went on many dates, and he proposed to me at that same aquarium where we had our first date. Could I really be this happy? That night, I was so excited that I couldn't sleep, and I still remember that feeling vividly. With my mind still filled with happiness, we quickly decided to visit his parents' home the next week. But during the visit, I started feeling unsure about our marriage. My father-in-law was nice, but my mother-in-law didn't seem to like me much. She even said, "You could have married someone more impressive than this ordinary girl." Hearing that made me doubt our future together and feel really anxious. But I figured everyone gets nervous before their wedding, right? So I pretended everything was okay and continued planning for the wedding. Then one day, while talking about our life after marriage, both my husband and his mom just assumed I'd quit my job. Even though I used to think quitting work after getting married was nice, I didn't see it as an option now. Looking back, I think my worries about marriage stopped me from considering leaving my job, where I felt safe. Even though my mother-in-law kept suggesting I quit, I decided to keep working at the same company as my husband, ignoring her. During our wedding planning, we didn't see eye to eye on when to officially register our marriage. He wanted to do it sooner, but we decided to go with his choice and did it shortly after. The process was pretty ordinary, but knowing we were officially married made me really happy. We talked about having a small, cozy wedding, but it seems he mentioned this to his mom. She called the next day. "You're planning a small wedding for Edward. Please don't make decisions without considering everyone's opinion. The wedding should be big and fancy. I'll make sure it's what Edward wants. And please keep your guest list short, just your parents and close friends. Your friends wouldn't add much excitement to the wedding anyway." I was overwhelmed with all the opinions flying around about the venue and guest list. It was frustrating that my soon-to-be mother-in-law thought she could control everything. But I didn't want to argue with her. Even though I had a lot to say, I kept quiet, thinking maybe this was just how weddings went. I ended up inviting only my parents and close friends, like she wanted. But her interference didn't stop there. She had something to say about everything: the schedule, entertainment, decorations, and food. If we followed all her suggestions, we'd blow our budget. At first, Edward's family agreed to split the wedding costs with us. But then that changed. Suddenly, it was all about the bride's family footing the bill, and we were way over budget. I had to cover all the extra expenses she wanted. So the wedding turned into this flashy event, completely different from the simple ceremony I had envisioned. I tried to make some changes secretly to save money, but she found out and scolded me, saying it looked cheap because I didn't listen to her. After the wedding, I hoped for some distance from my mother-in-law, but then my husband dropped a bombshell. I was tired of her meddling in the wedding plans, and despite knowing I wanted space from her, he insisted we move in with her. Our new place, which we'd already arranged, was suddenly canceled without my knowledge. All our stuff was redirected to my husband's family home. I was speechless, shocked that everything was decided without asking me. I handled all the wedding planning by myself. Even when I warned Edward about going over budget if we followed all of his mom's requests, he ignored me. My anxiety, which was already high, skyrocketed. We had planned to go on a honeymoon abroad after the wedding. It was a dream destination for me, and the thought of it felt unreal. But my growing discomfort with Edward's strange behavior and the idea of living with my mother-in-law when we got back put a damper on my excitement. Just like with the wedding planning, Edward wasn't very helpful with organizing our honeymoon. It was odd that he took charge of booking flights and hotels. I assumed he'd picked a romantic place for our honeymoon, and I was thrilled. Even though I ended up paying for everything, I was just happy he was pitching in, given all the excitement before the wedding. But I didn't realize this was a sign of things to come. Finally, the wedding was over, and amidst the chaos, our honeymoon day arrived. Despite some lingering doubts about the wedding and moving in with his mom, I was determined to enjoy the trip with Edward. But as I woke up in the middle of the night to get ready for our flight, Edward dropped a bombshell like it was no big deal. "Sarah, I'm going with my mom instead." As I was checking our luggage, I couldn't believe what Edward had just said. "What? What do you mean? This is our honeymoon, not just any trip. Why would your mom be coming? And we only booked for two for the flights and hotel." I was shocked, trying to make sense of it all when Edward dropped another bombshell. "I never said I was going on this trip with you, did I? Don't be ridiculous. I'm going with my mom. A trip with her is more important than our honeymoon. It's a thank you trip for all she's done for me. You stay here and clean the house from top to bottom." With that, Edward started tearing up my passport. I couldn't believe it, unable to speak, just watching as he destroyed it. Right then, my fully dressed mother-in-law barged into the room without even knocking. "Edward, are you ready?" Seeing her, Edward's face lit up. "Yeah, we're all set. Finally, we can go on this trip without any interruptions." They both chuckled, leaving me feeling disgusted. It hit me then. I was about to marry a nightmare. I'd been wondering how to get along with my mother-in-law, but this was beyond anything I could have imagined. I realized I'd made a huge mistake from the very beginning. "I see now what kind of people you both are," I couldn't hold back. But they just laughed it off as if my words were meaningless. They left together, leaving me feeling betrayed. I had been happy thinking Edward was helping with the honeymoon, but it was just a setup for him to go with his mother. He'd been planning it all along, booking everything under her name and leaving me to foot the bill. The betrayal stung, but my anger outweighed my sadness. The wedding and honeymoon I had always dreamed of were supposed to be unforgettable moments with the love of my life, but they were ruined by my mother-in-law and husband. It felt surreal. At first, I couldn't believe it was happening, but soon I realized I needed to take action fast. I had to get a divorce. Interestingly, I had something that could help me. I had started recording to capture memories of the most important events in my life, my wedding and honeymoon. Since the wedding preparations, I had been recording various moments on audio. What began as a way to cherish memories slowly turned into documenting my mother-in-law's hurtful actions and harassment. Sometimes I thought about stopping because I figured I'd never listen to these recordings again. But it's ironic how valuable they turned out to be. Just days after moving in, I found myself repacking my things. It didn't take long since I hadn't unpacked much. I couldn't help but wonder if my husband and his mother were already at the airport. The thought made me furious, so I tried to push it aside. Even though I'd only been there briefly, I wanted to erase any trace of myself from that house. So I cleaned thoroughly everywhere I'd been. While tidying the living room, I stumbled upon something shocking. Evidence that my husband was stealing money from his company. In his role overseeing sales, he was reporting lower earnings to the company and keeping the extra cash for himself. And it seemed his mother was involved too. She had detailed notes of the actual sales, the money he pocketed, and even listed all the luxury items he bought her with the stolen money. It was a lot. I couldn't believe they'd left such evidence out in the open. Finding out about my husband's wrongdoing left me horrified. I realized the seriousness of the situation. For a moment, I thought about trying to smooth things over since I also worked at the company. But then I thought, why should I help someone who ditched me for a honeymoon with his mother? So, armed with evidence of the embezzlement, I went to the company. Even though they were supposed to be on their honeymoon, my colleagues were shocked to see me in the office. As everyone bombarded me with questions about why I was at work instead of on my honeymoon, I decided I had nothing to hide. I explained that my husband and mother-in-law had gone on the honeymoon instead, that my passport was destroyed, and that I had paid for the entire trip. My colleagues, bosses, and superiors were shocked and furious on my behalf. I thanked them for their concern and headed to the executive area of the company. What my colleagues didn't know was that one of the top executives at the company is my uncle. I never mentioned this to anyone, not even my husband or mother-in-law. I didn't want people to think I got the job because of family connections, so I applied and secured the position based on my own merit. Since my uncle isn't involved in human resources, I asked him not to reveal our relationship before the orientation. Though surprised, he respected my decision and assured me that we would maintain a professional relationship at work. As a child, my uncle treated me like his own, showering me with love and indulging my wishes. We even went on trips together when I was younger. Despite my parents scolding me for asking him to buy me things, he adored me. Since joining the company, our paths rarely crossed except for a brief exchange during orientation. When I visited his office, my uncle's warm smile quickly faded as he sensed something was wrong. "Why are you here? Weren't you supposed to be on your honeymoon?" Seeing his familiar face, I couldn't hold back my tears. Through sobs, I told him everything that had happened. He was visibly furious, a side of him I had never seen before. I explained my husband's embezzlement and handed over the evidence. My uncle promised to hold a board meeting immediately to address the situation. After promising to address the situation, my uncle asked about my plans for the day. When I mentioned heading home, he suggested we grab some food together before he dropped me off. Despite the unbelievable betrayal I had experienced, I felt genuinely grateful for the warm-hearted people in my life who cared for me. A week later, when my husband and mother-in-law returned from what was supposed to be our honeymoon, I received an immediate call. My husband was furious that I hadn't picked them up from the airport or cleaned the house as instructed. He demanded to know where I was. With the support of my uncle and parents, I had already hired a top-notch divorce lawyer, and the process was underway. Without giving my husband a chance to speak, I said firmly, "You two are loud and annoying. I don't want to hear your voices anymore. Why would I pick up someone I'm divorcing? And why would I follow your orders to clean?" He was momentarily stunned but quickly resumed his ranting. "Do you think it's okay to speak to me like that? I did you a favor by marrying you. If I divorce you, you'll never find someone else. My mom's furious too. If you come back now and cook for us, I might forgive you. We're tired of foreign food. Make us some traditional meals." His words were shocking. After his scheme with the passport and going on a trip with his mother, I saw his true colors. It dawned on me that I had never truly known him. I had been reflecting on this realization for the past few days. "I've already consulted a lawyer about our divorce. Please discuss any related matters with them." "Divorce? What are you talking about? We're not getting a divorce." I heard his mother in the background, shouting for him to hand her the phone and calling me names. "Well, do as you please. By the way, I informed the company about your embezzlement. I think they'll be calling you in soon. Maybe you should get a lawyer too. Bye." I sensed his panic on the other end, but it wasn't my problem anymore. He kept calling, so I just blocked his number. My uncle knew our honeymoon dates, so right after our call, the company summoned my husband. With the evidence I provided, they verified the information and confirmed the discrepancies in the payments. It turned out the amount my husband embezzled was huge. In front of the company's executives, my husband desperately tried to defend himself. He made up a story claiming I was the real embezzler and he had tried to stop me. At that point, my uncle couldn't hold back and shouted, "My niece would never do such a thing. We've confirmed that you and your mother committed the embezzlement. You're lucky we haven't involved the police yet." Realizing his scheme had unraveled and that I had connections in senior management, my husband looked defeated. That day, I went to the company to return the wedding gifts to my colleagues. Despite our marriage ending so soon after the wedding, they all refused to take them back, saying they were given with heartfelt blessings. Surrounded by their warmth, my husband approached me, looking desperate. "Why didn't you tell me about your family connection? I'm sorry, truly. Can we start over? Can you ask your uncle to let me stay in the company and make the embezzlement charges disappear?" Disgusted, I replied. "Do you even hear yourself? Are you serious? Divorce is the only way forward now. Reflect on your actions and face the consequences." After I pushed him away, my colleagues intervened and called security, who removed him from the premises. He was immediately fired. As for the embezzlement, the company is pursuing damages from him. Upon learning about the situation, my mother-in-law attempted to contact my family repeatedly. However, after consulting my sensible father-in-law, the calls ceased. I had always wondered why my father-in-law had agreed to our honeymoon, but when he came to apologize later, admitting his mistake, it became clear. He had believed my mother-in-law was going on a domestic trip with her friends. He was looking forward to a peaceful week without her constant demands and nagging about shopping and dining out, hoping for a brief respite. When I returned home after learning about the ridiculous actions of my husband and mother-in-law, my father-in-law agreed that I should go back to my parents' home and helped me pack. Emotions were running high, and without much discussion, I left for my family home. I knew my father-in-law, being genuine, kind, and rational, would have stopped everything if he had known. He was the only reasonable person I could trust in that house. Although I was the victim, it was incredibly embarrassing to think my honeymoon had been hijacked by my mother-in-law. I even considered resigning from my job. My parents advised me to take a break from work for a while. However, my uncle suggested that working might help distract me, and he discussed it with the CEO. They arranged for me to be transferred to a branch office. The divorce process with my husband went surprisingly smoothly, thanks to an excellent lawyer. However, I later found out my father-in-law was involved. When we were planning our wedding and discussing expenses, it turned out my husband had almost no savings. My in-laws were just an average working-class family. With my mother-in-law's spending habits, they had little savings, as my father-in-law mentioned with a wry smile. The alimony I received considering our short marriage was surprisingly substantial. Shockingly, my father-in-law sold the family home to cover it. Their home wasn't in a city center, but in a close-knit community. When we got married, my mother-in-law invited the neighbors. They witnessed me returning to the family home on the day I was supposed to be leaving for our honeymoon, luggage in hand. With the neighborhood's penchant for gossip, rumors spread like wildfire. Over time, these rumors became exaggerated to the point where living in that area became unbearable. Initially, my mother-in-law, always concerned about appearances, approved of our marriage because both my husband and I worked for prestigious companies. Having her son and daughter-in-law working for a major company was a status symbol for her. However, with rumors swirling due to her actions, she likely couldn't bear to stay in that house. Additionally, my father-in-law probably felt responsible for covering the damages from my husband's embezzlement. While I harbor nothing but disdain for both my husband and mother-in-law, I genuinely feel sorry for my father-in-law. After being fired and ordered to pay damages, my husband apparently suffered a mental breakdown. Unable to work, he's been moping around in a small apartment he moved to. Seeing her son so downcast, my mother-in-law also became reclusive, as my father-in-law told me. In fact, my father-in-law, fed up with my mother-in-law, was considering divorce as he didn't want to spend his later years with her. He asked if I could introduce him to the lawyer I had used. I immediately contacted my uncle, who got in touch with the lawyer. It might take some time, but I hope my father-in-law can live the life he wishes. Thanks to the intervention of the company's CEO and my uncle, I was transferred to a branch office where I'm surrounded by supportive colleagues and superiors. I'm eternally grateful to my uncle. The only regret I have is missing out on the country we plan to visit for our honeymoon. Once things settle down, I hope to take a relaxed trip abroad.